Zephyra Mellowdusk. Each evening, as the last light bled from the sky, Zephyra Mellowdusk would ascend the worn spiral steps of her observatory, a stone tower that stood sentinel over the forgotten valley. Her ritual was a sacred, solitary thing, with precise, almost reverent movements. She would polish the great brass telescope, adjust its dials, and then wait. And then they would come. Faint at first, like dust motes catching the moonlight, the banished constellations would drift into view. She would whisper their names: Calum the Chisel, Noctua the Fallen Owl, and for a few hours their gentle, fading light was not a banishment, but a homecoming. Her core desire was a quiet, aching thing, to offer them not just refuge, but a place to remember their glory. The disruption began not with a sound, but with a silence. One evening, the stars simply failed to appear. The sky remained a vast, empty black. Then came the trembling, a deep subterranean shudder that sent vials of quicksilver and orrery models crashing to the observatory floor. Through the now vacant lens, Zephyra saw the source. A creeping, amorphous shadow was devouring the valley below, a void that consumed light and sound. It was moving toward the tower, and with a cold certainty, she knew it would swallow her celestial guests whole, extinguishing their last sanctuary forever. Desperate, Zephyra ransacked her library of arcane charts. The text spoke of a star anchor, a relic capable of grounding celestial energy and repelling the void, but it lay deep within the crystal caves, a labyrinth known to collapse upon intruders. She had no choice. In the nearest village, she found Calum, a gruff, pragmatic geomancer who had lost his family to a cave-in years prior and now refused to set foot underground. She found him mending a stone wall, his hands steady but his eyes haunted. Her request was met with a firm, furious refusal. It was only when a shard of the advancing void shattered his newly rebuilt wall that he finally, reluctantly, nodded, his alliance born not of courage, but of a shared, desperate necessity. The entrance to the crystal caves was a jagged maw of glittering teeth. Inside, the path was a treacherous illusion, with solid ground giving way to fathomless pits. Calum's knowledge of stone and pressure was their only guide. "Wait!" he would grunt, placing a hand on a wall, feeling its minute vibrations. "This way is false." When a chamber began to violently contract, threatening to crush them, it was Zephyra who saw the answer not in the earth, but in the air. A single weak star puppet, the stern, had drifted into the cavern through a fissure. Reading its faint pulse of light, she divined the safe path, a celestial wisdom perfectly complementing his terrestrial skill. They escaped, the relic within sight, and for a moment, a flicker of respect passed between them. They seized the star anchor, a pulsating crystal of pure astral energy. Emerging triumphant, they planted it at the valley's edge. A brilliant dome of light erupted from it, pushing the shadow back. The void recoiled, shriveling at the edges. In the observatory that night, a handful of constellations returned. Their light seemed stronger. Calum allowed himself a rare, weary smile, speaking of returning to his village at dawn. But Zephyra felt a cold disquiet. The returning stars were silent, their light strained. The anchor was not repelling the void, it was merely containing it, and the pressure was building. The shadow was not defeated, it was coiled, gathering its strength for a final catastrophic surge. The surge came at midnight. The star anchor, overwhelmed, shrieked and exploded into a million inert shards. The released void crashed over the land with renewed fury, thicker and hungrier than before. It swept past the observatory, swallowing the village whole. From her tower, Zephyra watched the faint, warm lights of Calum's home, the lights he had been so desperate to protect, be extinguished one by one, swallowed by the absolute blackness. A terrible silence followed. Calum fell to his knees, his face a mask of utter devastation. He turned to her, his voice broken.
"What was the point? We only made it angrier. We have nothing left."
Zephyra looked from Calum's despair to the empty, violated sky. Her own fear curdled into a hard, cold resolve. This was not just about refuge anymore. It was about defiance. "The point," she said, her voice low and steady, "is that they have nowhere else to go, and neither do we. She walked to her largest tome, its pages filled with the names of every fallen star. The texts mention a greater ritual, not of grounding but of purification. It requires a guide, a constellation of immense power to lead the way, and it requires an unbreakable will on earth to channel it. We did not fail. We merely learned the price of victory. Now we must decide if we are willing to pay it. The ritual required them to stand at the very heart of the void, the observatory now its epicenter. Zephyra called out, her voice weaving through the cacophony of the shadow, pleading for Lyra, unseating the constellation of song and memory. Slowly, painfully, its fractured form emerged from the chaos. Kalen, drawing on every ounce of his will, began to chant, his voice weaving a lattice of earth and stone beneath their feet, a platform of pure intention in the maelstrom. The void lashed out, forming claws and whispers of forgotten sorrows. Zephyra stood unwavering, her arms outstretched, channeling Lyra's pure melodic light directly into the darkness. It was not a battle of force, but of essence, the memory of light against the promise of oblivious. The light of Lyra blazed, a final cleansing note that shattered the void into nothingness. The immediate silence was deafening. The cost was written in the scene around them. Kale lay unconscious, his energy utterly spent, a hairline crack now tracing through the stone of his right hand. Lyra, having given its last light to save them, had dissolved into a mere shimmer, a ghost of a melody on the wind. The observatory was intact, but the valley below was scarred and empty. They had won, but the victory felt hollow, purchased with a debt of light and life. Weeks later, a new routine began. At dusk, Zephyra would still ascend the tower, but she was no longer alone. Kalen would be there, his cracked hand now gently tracing the star charts she laid out. Together, they would work. He taught the earth to remember the paths of the light, and she taught the returning stars, first as faint, scattered specks, to trust the world again. The refuge was no longer just a sanctuary. It was a school, a hospital, a forge for a new beginning. The silence was no longer empty, but patient, filled with the quiet, determined work of rebuilding not just a home, but a hope, integrating the profound cost of their victory into the very fabric of their new, fragile normal.